So for the next several lectures, we'll be using this book, Dig Deeper. So I hope you all have it. There's a lot of strengths of this book. It's clear. It gives you some really helpful tools. It's accessible, right? Sometimes you look at books about reading the Bible rightly, it just feels overwhelming. This is really accessible, and I think it's helpful in its articulation. It doesn't give you a lot of exercise or a lot of description of how to practice those tools. So, and some of those tools that are significant and need a little further explanation, we'll spend more time on them in class. My biggest challenge with the book, though, is that its organization is not ideal. Which one of these two toolboxes would you rather try to find a 3/4 inch socket in? Yeah, the one on the right. And for all the strengths of the number of tools on the left, it lacks some organization. And sometimes I feel that way with this book. Now, even if we tried to do an organizational approach to these tools, we would find ourselves encountering various challenges. So, if we think about that exegetical or interpretive method that we laid out yesterday, you'll remember that we started with this idea of what is the meaning of words. Then we looked at clauses, sentences, paragraphs, books, and then canon as a whole. So we progressed from the smallest units, words themselves. I guess we could go back to the very letters of the words, but the words themselves. And how do we understand words? Well, we do lexical studies. Okay, we try to figure out what these words have meant and mean in context and how a particular author is using those words. And then when we think about clauses, so how do these words among the clause, within a clause, relate to one another? That's the issue of grammar. So, to say that someone, let's say someone is the Son of God. What does the "of" mean there? Is it he's the Son related to God or the Son sent from God? Well, "of" can communicate both of those realities. And so we have to ask some questions about the relationships among words within a clause, and that's the discipline of grammar. When we think about sentences and syntax, we think about how clauses relate to one another. So even yesterday when we looked at Ephesians chapter 5, remember we saw some issues of syntax. Is a clause a subordinate clause? Is it a main clause? If it's subordinate, to what main clause is it subordinate? Then we think about paragraphs. So the paragraph, how does this fit together? How does it make an argument? And that's an important thing because these argumentative units combine to make the message of the book. Now, there's different ways to do argument analysis, and you already know that different genres make their arguments in different ways. So, you think about discourse, or we'll say epistles. There's almost sometimes these logical syllogisms that he goes through, this point, therefore this. And narrative tends not to be like that, right? Narrative tends to unfold its argument, and then you even see sometimes that the meaning of this narrative is in the juxtaposition of things within its context. Then we think about the book as a whole. What is the message of the book? And we can use the term book level meaning. And that's really significant because we can get bogged down in any one particular idea within a book or one story within a book, but we need to be able to zoom back out and see what does the book as a whole mean. So let's think about 1 and 2 Samuel, or in the Hebrew Bible, that's one book, Samuel. What is the message of the book as the whole? Okay, now there's various proposals, but we might say it's the establishment of the Davidic king. Let's say that, okay? It's the establishment of the Davidic king. So that means it has a role in the canon as a whole in establishing that Davidic monarchy. Now, the reason I didn't say the establishment of David as king is because even in the book itself, it points beyond David. Right? You think about 2 Samuel 7, it's saying it's not just David, but David's going to give rise to a forever king. So even within the book, we see that it's bigger than the book. It's pointing us to the canon. So if the book level meaning is to establishing the Davidic king, ultimately Jesus, then we have to ask, what is this particular narrative about? So there's some peculiar narratives within 1st and 2nd Samuel. So you come across this story about Saul consulting the witch of Endor. Like, that's a strange one, right? When he brings Samuel up and seems to interact with him. Or you have other issues where there's like, when the sons of Saul are given over to these people because there's blood guilt on Israel. Near the end of 2 Samuel, you're like, well, that's a strange thing as well. Or you have these other narratives that just seem peculiar. You're like, how do I understand those? Well, you understand those in terms of their immediate context, but then also the context of the whole that's pointing us not just giving us a structure to understand every narrative within the book, but it's giving us a structure to help us understand its position in the canon. Does that make sense? And even within a book like Samuel, we have a pointing to its greater role within Christian Scripture. And that takes us to our last point, looking at the canon as a whole. So, how do we understand what these narratives are doing as a whole? So, we think about biblical theology. We looked at that discipline last class period. Like, how do we see this unfolding idea? And when we think about we'll use the example of 2 Samuel there, how does that participate in that unfolding idea of the king? Well, this idea of dominion or kingship is all the way back in Genesis 1, and we see it at the very end of the book of Revelation. So we understand individual narratives within their books and individual books within the canon. Okay, so if that's our interpretive model, and I realize that's a skeletonized approach here, we could say more about any singular point, how do the tools in Dig Deeper fit into this? Okay, and this is the best I can do, is to say that some of these tools are about the sentence level, the word level. Some of them are about the canon as a whole. Now, there's a challenge here, right? One of the things I note here is that repetition can occur at the level of sentence, paragraph, books, or canon. And then even translation. I put that in words and I put that in canon, right? Because the translation tool that we'll look at can function at both of those levels. So even as I, kind of criticize Dig Deeper for not having great organization, I realized if they tried to have organization, it would be a challenge in and of itself. In this course, what we'll try to do is we'll try to progress down this chain, okay? And I say that, and I already covered the Bible timeline. I've already covered biblical theology, right? I started there. So we'll start today, and we'll talk about the vocabulary tool. Now, when we come to grammar, we can do some of this in English, and those of you who love those sentence diagrams, your heart will sing. But there's also some of this grammatical analysis that is more inclined to original languages. And then we can look at sentences and paragraphs and so forth. So here are some of the main tools that we're going to focus. I want to make sure that we get at least these. I want you to know all of the tools are important. Some of them are intuitive to you. Some of them you'll read the Dig Deeper's explanation, be like, yep, I got that tool. Some of them you'll be like, okay, I need more explanation. So I think this vocabulary tool, you read those few pages and you're like, okay, but I don't know how to do it. I know that it's important, but I need more explanation of it. Okay, and these tools are reflected also in your syllabus. So we come to this first question. What is the vocabulary tool? Our book says this: every field has its own terminology. It's not uncommon for ordinary words to be invested with special meaning. An albatross means something rather different to a golfer than to a birdwatcher. Okay, so I know what an albatross is to a birdwatcher. What is an albatross to a golfer? Yes. One stroke less than the eagle. So that's really good. There you have it. And then there's the poem about the albatross too, and the albatross means something different there. That's a really bad thing. You guys know this? Is it the flight of the albatross or the flight? Yeah, that's right. That's what its title is. Yes. Well, technical terms may be intimidating at first sight. You have probably found that once you spend a little time familiarizing yourself, they're not so hard after all. The Bible is no different. It too has its own distinctive vocabulary and uses words in a certain way. So, if there's something, name something that you're passionate about. Okay? That's appropriate for camera too. What's something that you're excited about? A hobby of yours, maybe? Yeah. Roller coaster engineering. Okay, I didn't expect that one. So are you going to be an engineering major? Or? Okay. What? Is that mechanical engineering? Is that what you're going to?
It's a lot of kind of everything, but what I kind of want to get to is mechanical engineering.
Okay, and there's probably no degree program that has roller coaster engineering. Roller coaster engineering, think about some terms that are unique to that. So, like when we think about, anybody else here passionate about roller coaster engineering? Probably not, right? Anybody here hate roller coasters? That would be me. Anybody here love roller coasters? And there are many of you who are indifferent, okay? So what's a term that's unique to roller coaster engineering?
Block section.
Block section. Okay. You got another term?
LIM launch system.
Yep, that's another. So those things that we don't know, but man, if it's something you're excited about, you're going to learn those terms, right? So the Bible has some terms that, you don't throw out on a daily basis. When's the last time you dropped propitiation in a casual conversation? Probably not. Try it. Your friends will be impressed. But there's just terms that are unique to the Bible, but they're terms that have theological weight, so we need to learn them. So our class goals are very simple. We're going to understand the vocabulary tool, and then we're going to practice the vocabulary tool. So the vocabulary tool. Okay. Can you name a word that has just one meaning? Not a science term, but give me a word. Somebody give me a word. That's not a hard thing. Just give me a word. Pen. Okay. Pen can have multiple meanings, right? It can have multiple references. You can have a ballpoint pen, you can have a quill pen, you can have a fountain pen. What's that? A pig pen. Well, that can be a reference to an actual pig pen, but you can say politics is a pig pen. It can be a metaphor. Good. Give me another one. Water? Yeah, because it can be a verb. You water something down, and it can be a noun, water itself. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah, Jesus is not a reference to just one person in the Bible. There are a number of, so if it's Yeshua, there are a number of Old Testament people named Jesus. And it's also a Spanish name, yeah. Good. Any other attempts here? Phone? Oh, you can phone a friend verb, and you can have a phone, that's a noun. Chair. You can have a rocking chair, reclining chair, all sorts of chairs. Yeah, he is the chair of this council. Light. You can light something, a verb, and light can be a noun. You see, the challenge herein is that words can have a lot of different meaning. So I have a fun little thing here. So this is from a book, How to Understand and Apply the New Testament. And he talks about the funny English language. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit of this. And it'll help you understand the challenge of terminology and why we need to define our terms. In what other language? This is a little essay from Richard Lederer called Crazy English. That's in Naselli's book here. In what other language do people drive in a parkway and park in a driveway? In what other language do people play at a recital and recite at a play? Why does night fall but never break and day break but never fall? Why is it that when we transport something by car, it's called a shipment, but when we transport something by ship, it's called cargo? Why do we pack suits in a garment bag and garments in a suitcase? Why in our crazy language can your nose run and your feet smell? Hot dogs can be cold, dark rooms can be lit, homework can be done in school, nightmares can take place in broad daylight, while morning sickness and daydreaming can take place at night. Tomboys are girls, and midwives can be men. Hours, especially happy hours and rush hours, often last longer than 60 minutes. Quicksand works very slowly, boxing rings are square, silverware and glasses can be made of plastic and tablecloths of paper. Most telephones are dialed by being punched or pushed. Most bathrooms don't have any baths in them. In fact, a dog can go to the bathroom under a tree. No bath, no room. It's still going to the bathroom. And doesn't it seem a little bizarre that we go to the bathroom in order to go to the bathroom? Why is it that women can man a station, but a man can't woman one? That a man can father a movement, but a woman can't mother one? And that a king rules a kingdom, but a queen doesn't rule a queendom? If adults commit adultery, do infants commit infantry? This next one is, if olive oil is made of olives, where do they make baby oil from? If a vegetarian eats vegetables, what does a humanitarian consume? If pro and con are opposites, is Congress the opposite of progress? Why can you call a woman a mouse but not a rat, a kitten but not a cat? Why is it that a woman can be a vision but not a sight unless your eyes hurt, then she's a sight for sore eyes? A writer is someone who writes, and a stinger is something that stings. But fingers don't fing, grocers don't grosh, hammers don't ham, and humdingers don't humding. Ushers don't ush, and haberdashers don't haberdash. Should I go on or a couple? Okay. It's just making the same point, but okay. If the plural of tooth is teeth, shouldn't the plural of booth be beef? One goose, two geese, so one moose, two meese. One index, two indices, one Kleenex, two Kleenexes. If people ring a bell today and rang a bell yesterday, why don't they say that they flang a ball? If they wrote a letter, perhaps they also boat their tongue. If the teacher taught, why is it also true that the preacher prot? We're going to bring that, we're going to make that a word. What did your pastor prot on Sunday? Why is it that the sun shone yesterday while I shined my shoes, that I treaded water and then trod on the beach, that I flew out to see a World Series game, in which my favorite player flied out? A slim chance and a fat chance are the same, as are a caregiver and a caretaker, a bad licking and a good licking. And what's going on and what's coming off, but a wise man and a wise guy are opposites. Why is it that when the sun or the moon or the stars are out, they are visible, but when the lights are out, they are invisible? That when I clip a coupon from a newspaper, I separate it, but when I clip a coupon to a newspaper, I fasten it. And that when I wind up my watch, I start it, but when I wind up this essay, I shall end it. English is such a crazy language. Okay, that's kind of a fun little thing, right? But we see that words can be used variously. And you read those things and you're like, oh, that makes, I'm following along. I know those things because I know the English language, sort of. Word study is important, but it's not an end in itself. As we've mentioned before, a word means virtually nothing apart from its context. So word study is merely one, albeit a vital component part in the overall process of interpretation. Okay, so what we are trying to say is that if we're going to understand a passage, we need to understand the words that comprise that passage, but there's also a movement back of the passage onto the word in which the words mean something in their context. So the words place pressure on the passage, and the passage places pressure on the word. In context, words mean different things. And we saw that even as I asked you from some various words. Now, I know some of you are like, word study. I did this some in my church growing up, or when my pastor used to prot. He would use a lot of word studies. And then some of you are thinking, yes, another word study. Some of you are excited for a good word study. So, our youth pastor at my church, great man. He actually took syntax and exegesis with me this past year. And so we had a joke, and I'm going to share this joke with you, not as a criticism of my youth pastor, who's wonderful, but as our inside joke that I'm letting you in on. Yeah, so we've all seen word studies used ineffectively, right? And it's like, this is what the word means in Greek, and then it's fraught with this special meaning because you cited a Greek word, and it's like, well, I mean, it means the same thing in English, right? So this is our inside joke, and now it's an outside joke to all of you as well. I didn't create that meme, I found it. Okay, so word studies. Let's think about it. This is a little introduction to word studies. So I grew up with word studies in my local church being wielded as the key to understanding everything. And every sermon, whenever my pastor would prot, there would be a word study. So that's what I came to expect. And some of those really stand out. I'm going to share one that really stood out to me. It related to the idea of baptism, right? So here we have an infant being baptized. And I grew up in a Baptist church, so, we didn't baptize like that. We had, get them all the way under. And you got to get them all the way wet, right? And one of the arguments that I heard, and I'm telling you, I heard this a number of times, is it was, baptizdo means a sunken ship. And anybody else ever hear this? I'm the only one? Well, you didn't. This was part of my experience growing up. So it's baptizdo means a sunken ship. You can't sink a ship by just sprinkling it. And what it was here is it's an appeal to a particular reference within all the uses of this term, this Greek term, to say that one time it was used to be a sunken ship, and then that is going to determine my liturgical practice, right? Because you can't be like that sunken ship if you only sprinkle. That's not a great use of a word study, just to say. Word studies can matter. We need to understand what baptizdo means. But appealing to 3rd or 4th century BC, and what a sunken ship was is not probably the best approach. Okay, here's another example. So I heard a really compelling sermon once about the Ethiopian eunuch. And he arose and went, and there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. He had come to Jerusalem to worship, and he was returning seated in his chariot. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. Okay, so the question is, what is a eunuch? Well, it's at very least a court official. But then the guy who was preaching, he really pressed into this to say that this was probably someone due to something that was either done to him or how he was born, who had some sexual confusion. And then that allowed him then to press into this idea of that's how people feel today. So that this Ethiopian eunuch became an example of someone who's sexually confused and searching. Well, the challenge with that is eunuch here is just seemingly used as a court official. So when Luke, writing Acts, wants to define that, what a eunuch is, he doesn't press into anything sexual, right? He just presses into the idea of him being a court official. And then if you look in the rest of the Bible, now I'm going to look at the Greek Old Testament. Actually, somebody read for me. Genesis, I've got the wrong reference here. It says Genesis 1, 1 through 7, but it's about Joseph, so it's not. But let me just read it for you. Now Joseph was led down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the eunuch of Pharaoh, an Egyptian man who was the chief cook, acquired him from the hands of the Ishmaelites, who led him down there. And it happened after these matters that the wife of his Lord cast her eyes on Joseph and said, sleep with me. Okay, so what do we see here? Well, we see here Potiphar is a eunuch. Okay, in what sense is Potiphar a eunuch? Well, he has a wife, right? So it's probably not saying anything about his sexuality. It's probably saying that eunuch in this sense could just be a court official. So it might be, because Jesus uses this term, eunuch, right? Some were made eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. So it can have sexual reference. But the term itself doesn't settle that, because it doesn't have to have reference to one's sexuality, right? So what I want to say in this is that perhaps that is an appropriate inference to draw from the term, but it's probably pressed too far. Another challenge with word studies, and I apologize for this next slide because it's all in a foreign language. Another challenge with word studies is that the same English word might be used for a variety of Greek words. So this sentence, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than those? Okay, more than these. So do you love me more than these? And then, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. But there's a different word used. And so there's an alternation between this word agapao and phileo. Okay? Until it concludes at the end with just phileo. Now, you probably can imagine in the context in which I grew up, they really said, hey, you got to do a word study if you're going to understand this. Now, the challenge here is it's true there's an alternation, but there's semantic overlap between these words so that there actually might not be great significance other than just semantic variety of lexemes being used. Hope you see that terms are significant, especially when we think about highly theological terms. So let's think about this vocabulary tool that Dig Deeper gives us. I want to give it a little more explanation. So why is it important? Well, we've seen some examples. But words have meaning. You can't understand an author's meaning if you don't understand his words. If I read something in a foreign language to you, you're like, I don't understand those words. So I don't understand what the author is trying to communicate. If I said to a senior, in order to graduate, you must go to that office. Well, I just made up a bunch of letters there, but if he doesn't know what that office is, he might not be able to graduate, right? So that word actually has importance because he needs to know what it is in order to graduate. Now, there are challenges. I had a good friend, he's passed away now. Actually, Johnson Hall, anybody know where Johnson Hall is on campus? Doc Johnson, he used to use this term, stained glass words. So biblical words that are not used in everyday speech, they're exclusively like church words. They call them stained glass words. It's like, what does it mean? What does propitiation mean? What does redemption mean? Those are words that we don't understand because we don't use them in everyday speech. Everyday words can be used differently. So pop culture can use a word differently. Even though the translation might be correct, the way that the culture uses the term hope, for example, is different than the biblical understanding of hope. These are categorically different ideas. Words can have changing meaning. So we looked at an example of this. We looked at charity in 1 Corinthians 13. When King James Bible was translated, it meant something different than what we mean by it today. So the question is, how do we discern what biblical authors meant by a given word? I'm going to give you a few steps. Okay, here's steps for a word study. But I want to begin by asking this question. Has anybody played the game Guess Who? Yes, a few of you have played Guess Who. Okay, so you're playing Guess Who, and you have an opponent, okay, and you've got this Guess Who board, and you've got the stack of cards. What's the first step? Yeah? No, there's a step before that. What do you have to do? Yeah? No, that was just a hand. What's the first step in Guess Who? Yeah? You choose your player. And second step, you prepare your board. How do you prepare your Guess Who board? You flip them all up, right? You get all your options on the table, okay? Now, let's assume you play Guess Who and you don't put all your options on the table. You're like, I'm just going to play with this half. What's the danger there? Maybe the right answer is on that half. So you need to flip all of your faces up in Guess Who. And then what do? You start asking key questions. And what do these key questions do? They eliminate possibilities. So I ask a question like that eliminates some of these characters and then these characters until I arrive at the most likely meaning. And a word study is like that. The first thing we have to do is we have to establish all the possibilities, all the things that it can mean. So we started to do that when somebody said chair earlier, and we started to say, well, here are all the things that a chair can mean. We established those possibilities, and now we're starting to eliminate them by asking questions of the context. Okay, so steps for a word study. The first thing, though, when we do a word study is we have to identify the most significant or unclear words. Okay, we're going to go back through these steps in more detail. But you got to identify which words I want to do a word study on. Then you got to establish all the meanings of that word. So if you're taking notes, I'll present each of these steps and then we'll go back through them and explain them in more detail. Identify the most significant or unclear words. Establish the possible meanings of the word. Gather all the uses of the word in the Bible if possible. Now, a more in-depth word study would gather the uses of this term even outside the Bible. So when we have like an advanced Greek class or advanced Hebrew class, we're going to look at that term and then we're going to look at that term outside of Scripture as well to see how other authors have used the term. For our purposes, if we can do a word study within the Bible itself, that'll be really valuable for us. Survey how the word is used. So you're going to okay, so I've gathered these and I'm going to start making assessments. And I'm going to start surveying, seeing how things are done and things are drawing on. Then I'm going to analyze the text. So I'm going to ask questions of the text itself to discern the most likely meaning for the specific use of the word. And then I'm going to check. Last step, I'm going to check my assessment with other translations and commentaries. Now, these steps can all be done through physical copies of books. So there are things like concordance or things like Strong's numbers that you can access in physical books. So there are many online tools. One that we'll use is called Blue Letter Bible. It has a lot of these resources in one place for you, and it's free online. So there's other places we can look. Bible Gateway there's Bible Resources is another one. Logos has a lot of these. There's any number of places. I'm not endorsing any particular one, but a lot of these things are now accessible online, which is a great benefit to you. Okay, step 1. Identify most significant or unclear words. So how do I know which words to do a word study on? Like, should I do a word study on and or the, right? Probably not. I'm going to need to do a word study on words that are significant. So maybe it's an unclear word. I just don't understand what this word means. I come across the word and I'm like, I don't know what that means. Well, then I might need to find that out. Something that's contextually crucial. Like if I read Ephesians 2, for by blank you have been saved. What is that word? By grace you have been saved. If I don't understand grace, well, that's important, right? Because I need to understand salvation. Things that are theologically significant. The word has a profound theological meaning. I want to understand. Something that's figurative or symbolic. It alludes to something else. That's be a helpful thing. If it's compared and contrasted, so we have something that's two words and they're used in parallel in some way. Or if it's repeated, like if it just keeps coming up again and again and again, the author's really making a point. So like in Galatians, the word law could be important. I need to understand, what does he mean law? Does he mean some natural law? Does he mean Roman laws? Does he mean the Mosaic law? What does he mean? Does he mean the law of Christ? What does that mean? So those are some things that help me think, okay, these are the words that I would need to do a word study on. Many of the words in a passage are going to be intuitive, but some of them you're going to be like, I need to know what that means. So in our interpretive practice sheets, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. And there's going to be some key words in there. You're going to be like, I do not know what this term means. So I need to look it up. Next step, and these steps 2 and 3 go hand in hand. You want to establish the possible meanings of the word. Now, an easy little shortcut to get you on the right direction is to use a dictionary. And you're better off using a theological dictionary than just a Webster's dictionary, because Webster's dictionary is going to give you a bunch of modern definitions. But a Bible dictionary will give you definitions in the context of a Bible. And there's some online tools that just give you ready access to things that are really helpful. Now, why do I want to establish the possible meanings of the word? Why is that helpful? Well, a word can mean a number of things. So again, Naselli's book is really helpful. Let's take the word run. I run 2 miles every day. Can run be used? Can run mean anything else? Run. Yeah, to operate something is to run it. Yes. Run this by my friend. Yeah, good. It's to inform or to seek counsel. Any other ways that run can be used? Like straining your minds early in the morning. Yeah. Yeah, a computer program. I run a computer program. Your nose can run, especially in allergy season. Great war between my sinuses and the pollen. Well, she has a run in her nylons. We don't use the term nylons anymore probably, but the run there is a rip. A grapevine runs through a fence. My nose runs when I have a cold. I need to run to the store. A new computer runs faster than the previous one. I try not to let the water run. It's like keep flowing when I'm not using it, because that runs up. It accumulates the water bill. I ran out of gas today. Someday I'll run for president. You see all these uses, and we actually added a usage to what he had listed there. We need to establish the possible meanings. Like if I'm doing a word study on run, I better have all those possibilities. And then we're going to gather the uses of the word in the Bible. So this is where like a concordance is really helpful. Now, so I want to say, like, I'm going to do a word study on, give me a word. Any word? Predestination. You can imagine there's been some word studies done on that one, right? I'm going to do a word study on predestination. Well, I need to find out, if I'm going to look at that word, it's going to be predestined. It's going to be the verb in Romans 8, for example. I'm going to have to find where's that used. Right? I'm going to have to look at how can I find where it's used in the Bible? Now, a question we have is, can we do this in English or should we do it in Greek and Hebrew? Well, the answer is yes, we can do it in English. But there are some challenges, right? So Greek and Hebrew provide some helps to us. Now, let me just illustrate that in one way. So let's think of the word faith. Okay, if you had to give a verbal equivalent of faith, what would it be? Yep. Well played, sir. So you could say dependence. So the verbal equivalent of faith, a noun, is depend, or trust, or what does the Bible often use, the translators? Believe, right? We don't have a good, we can say to have faith, but we can't say to faith. He faithed Jesus. What is that? That was not an English word, right? So the challenge here is when we look at original language, the word faith, anybody know what the Greek word for faith is? That should have been our extra credit opportunity. Pistis. And do you know what the Greek word for to have faith is? Pistuo. So you see that the pist root, right, is connected. And because that root's connected, it helps us understand some connections that we might not see in English. Let me give you another one. We looked at this at the very, very first couple classes. This term gospel. Okay, so in Greek, there's this word gospel, euangelion, and to preach the gospel is euangelizo. But I can't gospel. I went out gospeling on Saturday. What does that mean? Well, I went out preaching the gospel. So we just don't have an English equivalent. We can say to preach the gospel or to share the good news. And the challenge is if I'm looking for all the uses of gospel in an English text, there might be a place where euangelion is used as good news, and there might be a place where it's used as gospel. Euangelisto might be rendered in some place as to preach the gospel, it might be to share the good news, or it might be to evangelize. So there's some challenge there in not having a one-to-one ratio. So original language is better because you might have multiple Greek words with the same English translation. We saw that in John 21. Do you love me? I love you. But it's a different word. One Greek word might have a different English translation because, again, language isn't a one-to-one correspondence. A story here, I had a friend who said when he was younger, his dad was called to be a missionary to French Canada. And the church was really supportive. And then the church came around and commissioned him, sent him off. And there was a sweet church lady who came up to this missionary and said, look, I'm going to support your ministry financially. I will do anything you need for me to support your ministry. If you need just letters, translated, if you need me to translate your English into French so that'll be helpful to you, I'll do that, whatever I can do. And he asked kind of the dumb question. He's like, so I didn't know do you know French? Oh, her response was, oh no, I don't know French, but what I'll do is I'll look up every English word in a French dictionary, then I'll just write the French word for every English word. Now, those of you who study the language know that that's not going to work, right? You're not just going to be able to look up that word and see what's the corresponding French word and just write it out, because words are conjugated and words aren't They're not a one-to-one correspondence. There's some tools to help you. English language word search. Okay? Some terms are going to have a pretty clear equivalent. So, predestined, that's one that you're probably going to be able to do an English word search on. But then let's say you want to do propitiation, and you're like, okay, propitiation, and then you start looking, you're like, one translation uses atoning sacrifice, one translation uses a mercy seat. Like, what is it? One translation will say propitiation. So you can just go to your preferred Bible, and like ESV, for example, you can just go there and you can just search a word. You want to find all the uses of the word? You can find it. And I want to say, I do that sometimes. That's a helpful tool. You can use an original language concordance. Strong's Concordance is one that just has numbers for every word that helps somebody who doesn't know the original language just have some more clarity there. I'm going to teach you how to do that. And then Logos can be helpful too, and I'll show you what that does. Okay, survey how the word is used. Okay, you look at different contexts and associations. So what you need to do is you get all this list. So let's say we do this list. Let's say some of these words are going to have like 500 uses. So that's going to be really hard to do. But let's say there's a word that has 30 uses. It's used 30 times in the Bible. Okay? We need to start asking questions. Is it concentrated in a particular part of the Bible? So let's just deal with the New Testament and say, okay, this word, it's used all of these times. Is it used in a particular context? Okay, let me give you a word. Disciple. In the New Testament, where is disciple used? What books? Gospels. Where else is it used? Where at in the epistles? Just a couple times in Acts. Not pervasively, though, is it? Can you think of me another time? What you should be thinking right now is, I'm getting on ESV Bible or whatever that I'm gonna see how many times it's used, right? But you see a term like that that's really located in a particular grouping, right? It's in a particular portion of Scripture. In what types of writing is it used? So, justification, you're going to see in legal texts, right? You're not going to see it in poetic text as much. In what settings is the word used? Is it a rule, an urban word? What context? So, think about the parables of Jesus. The parable went out to sow. Well, that's not an urban thing, right? That's a rural context. So then the question is, if it's always used in a rural context, and then that I compare that to my context of the particular usage. With what other words is it associated? So, let's just take one of those words. Let's take the word justification. What other words are often associated with it? Is it often associated with, in the New Testament, with Christ? Is it often associated with law? Is it often associated with grace? Like, how do we sort through some of those things? Is it often associated with faith? And then how does the author of your specific text tend to use the word? So our study is going to be in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. So there's going to be important words there. And we're going to have to say, well, how does Paul tend to use this word? And when you have an author who has a larger corpus like Paul or John or Luke, there's a lot more comparative data. And what you're doing is you're eliminating, you're knocking down some of those guess who characters. And then you want to analyze this text. You're going to do exegesis of this text to determine the most likely meaning for the specific use of the word. So you're moving from semantic range, all the possibilities, all the things that this word can mean, to specific usage. Some questions that you can ask. What does the passage seem to be about? Like, let's set this word aside, but what is the main thrust of this passage? Are there other contexts that are similar to this passage? So, for example, we're talking about Paul. Like, Galatians and Romans are pretty similar in their thrust in some ways. So, I'm going to look for comparisons there especially. Or you can think about texts like Colossians and Ephesians, or 1 Timothy and Titus. Again, there's close contextual ideas in both of them. Then if you have a definition, read the paragraph with the probable meaning, or the possible meanings, which one makes the most sense. So we're talking about chair. So let's use the term, this is really contrived, but let's use the term chair referring to a bench, or chair referring to a leader. Okay, and we have this paragraph. He came in, and as he got situated in his office in the morning, he sat down on his chair and started to work. So he sat down on his bench, or he sat down on his leader. Well, one of those is clear, right? So inserting those definitions into that context can be helpful. So once we've done that, I think this is what it means. Then we're going to check. We're going to check with commentaries and translations. Now, we're going to look at the translation tool in a bit, but I want to make a comment about the translations. So the people who translate the Bible, they're not fools. Sometimes you'll say like, you hear people say, that's a dumb translation. It's like, people aren't foolish. Like, these are people who have done a lot of work, but they're also not infallible. So there can be some missed translations. They can have agendas. So we think about that term predestination that you brought up. Like, some people have a particular agenda with how they might want to render that word. Your own word study helps you evaluate and nuance translation. And then, like I mentioned, the Net Bible, for example. One of the really helpful things about the Net Bible is that the Net Bible has very specific translation notes. So they tell you the word is translated this way, and here's why.